This photograph shows police officers with shields and rifles, flanked by armored vehicles. For much of the 20th century, the state maintained order through this kind of overt, centralized Weberian force. Contrast that with this split poster, comparing free shopping to paying behind bars. This colorful, highly banal artifact represents the modern strategy of community policing. Law enforcement professionals often frame this shift as a democratic evolution. They assume that handing out pamphlets and setting up neighborhood watches is a method of improving public relations. But in Singapore, community policing functions through a different mechanics. It operates as a socio-technical apparatus that relies on the participation of the citizen as the primary agent of state order. In the years immediately following independence, the primary directive was securing foreign investment. Multinational corporations required absolute macroeconomic stability and an obedient workforce to justify building their supply chains there. As this time-lapse shows, dense jungle was rapidly overtaken by the geometric concrete foundations of massive housing blocks in the 1980s. The state moved populations out of urban centers and into these decentralized public housing estates. This aerial view captures the sheer physical reality of the new residential grid. Thousands of tall, densely packed apartment blocks stretched across the island. A centralized police force built for urban riot control cannot effectively patrol endless vertical corridors. Top-down coercion loses its operational reach when the population is distributed across such a sprawling grid. Securing these new economic engines required a different architecture of control. The state replaced top-down coercion with a localized mechanism capable of governing behavior at the neighborhood level. The structural response to this decentralized housing grid was the Neighborhood Police Post, or NPP. Instead of housing officers in distant divisional headquarters, the state physically embedded these miniature police outposts directly into the ground floors of the new apartment blocks, placing the state inside the domestic sphere of the working class. Officers stationed here were not tasked with reacting to emergencies or conducting criminal investigations. Their operational doctrine was active preventative socialization. Crime prevention became the primary vehicle for interacting with the public. Officers conducted house visits and held roadshows, positioning residents as partners in local security rather than passive subjects of the law. By planting an NPP in every electoral ward, the state transformed the neutral spaces of the residential heartland into a territorialized grid of continuous surveillance. The NPP's entire prevention doctrine revolved around a strict categorization of 5 specific preventable property crimes. This comparative table highlights snatch theft advisories from 1986 and 2011. The behavioral instructions remain consistent across decades. They explicitly target the routines of the potential victim. Instead of identifying perpetrators, the state systematically restricts the daily habits of the resident. This focus on property crime trains citizens to perceive their physical homes and personal belongings as vital financial assets. Protection of these assets demands continuous individual defense. By centering the prevention of property theft, the state successfully entrenches the boundaries of private property and normalizes the logic of capitalist consumption within the domestic sphere. This shoplifting poster demonstrates techniques of psychological normalization. First, banalization. Embedding messaging into daily rhythms makes it background noise, conditioning automatic situational awareness. Second, aggrandizement. Offenses are abstracted into a terrifying concept called crime. Slogans like "low crime doesn't mean no crime" ensure high anxiety. Together, banalization and aggrandizement shift the psychology of the citizen. Casual interaction in public spaces is replaced with a conditioned baseline of chronic suspicion. The stark contrast between shopping for free and paying behind bars reveals the third technique, moralization. This aligns legal compliance with moral righteousness. The fourth is displacement. Prevention is better than cure. This shifts the security burden from law enforcement directly onto the citizen. In this framework, future victimization is framed as a personal failure of the citizen to properly secure their own environment, rather than a failure of the police to capture a criminal. These 4 techniques function as technologies of the self. They offload the cost of law enforcement by transforming the citizen into an unpaid agent of the state. This network map illustrates a paradox. The neo-communitarian ideal assumes community policing builds strong social bonds, but the behavioral reality engineered by situational crime prevention breaks those bonds apart. It inherently relies on self-preservation and calculation, not organic mutual aid. As seen in this tracking shot through a transit hub, citizens are actively trained to adopt a criminalizing gaze in public spaces to protect investments. Normal behaviors, like loitering youths or transient workers or a stranger rushing an elevator, are immediately flagged by this gaze as deviant threats. While deployed under the guise of building social cohesion, community policing fragments neighborhoods through a fabric of mutual suspicion. Looking at this dusk view of public housing blocks, the housing estate functions as a landscape of perfected self-regulation. This is an execution of governmentality, an apparatus where power works through the individual's own freedom of choice to produce compliant subjects. The state no longer requires centralized, coercive force to maintain order. The built environment and behavioral conditioning do the work for them. The manufactured homeowner-citizen actively polices themselves and their neighbors to protect their economic stake in the nation. The genius of this apparatus lies in the blurred boundary between the police and the public. The population has been engineered to watch itself.